All right, Shalom. You reached the He Prayed channel. My name is Isaac Mawath. But first and foremost, I want to say, call Halayim Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shah Bahashim Harakak. Double honors to the apostles and elders of 7:13:19, where I learned this truth from and who rule well. Salutations to the Bakyar, the elect, the 144,000. That's 12,000 men from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel consist of you so-called blacks, Latinos, and indigenous of America. The 144,000 being the governing body within the one-third. The rest of the one-third comprises of elect men, women, and children. Shalom to those Israelites scattered due to the diaspora and also the triangular trade. So our people come looking like different ethnicities, having various complexions. So this is not a black thing. We're not the black Hebrew Israelites. We're just Hebrew Israelites. Shalom to those that die in this truth. It says the dead should be raised up first. Those that will be accompanying Yahweh Shah on his return, including our King, King Mashah, who is King David. And as always, it's an honor and privilege, honor and blessing to continue to do this work. The water Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah for answering my prayers, permitting me to do such. Baba Kashah Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah Ba'ashem Harakak. Allow this to be an edifying lesson to at least one member of the elect. So I'm going to go into AI today, which the title topic, because the title is going to be the topic. It says, don't be worldly, only apply to the Israelites. You know, as I was meditating, I was thinking about growing up, you know, and how it was a lot of Northern Kingdom young women that identified themselves as, you know, being devout Christians. And they will wear the long dresses and, you know, everyone perceived that their dedication involved who the world only calls Jesus Christ, whether they were Catholics or, you know, Christians, you know, but what did they wear that attire for? Why were they covered up while everyone else was conditioned to be lewd? Is because they were taught and told not to be worldly, you know. Also, growing up, you were warned about certain people. You know, there was a point of time when even certain of these women chose their significant other based upon their character. You know, they didn't want anyone who was worldly. You know, certain groups didn't want to hang around those that act too worldly. You know, until fairly recently, that whole attitude has shifted to you don't fit in our circles unless you are worldly. And over time, through Esau, being worldly became being cool, fitting in. You know, be that, you know, square peg that is going to fit in that square hole. You know, but the elect, you know, those that are of the nation of Israel that were given this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, you know, they are not worldly. you know. So going to Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1, it says, Hear ye the word which Yahweh speaketh unto you, O house of Yasharallah. Thus saith Yahweh, learn not the way of the heathen. So we're not to learn the way of the heathen, man. We have our own culture, we have our own language. We created all things. We are gods. Why the hell do we need to learn after those that we created to serve us through the spirit and power of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah? Through that, they develop jealousy. So basically, they attacked us with our kryptonite. And our kryptonite is sin, man. You know? And that's the reason why this world is set up in the fashion that it is, to encourage that worldly mind state that leads to sin, which is the death of gods. But I wanted to get to a point. This is the book of Judah, chapter 5, verse 17. It says, Whilst they sin not before their power. Let's see what sin is. I believe this is in First John. Right. This is First John, chapter 3, verse 4. It says, Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law. Right? For sin is the transgression of the law, which is the laws that we received through Moses from Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah Ba'ashem HaKodash. And those laws are not grievous, but yet when our people don't follow those laws, they lose their power. They lose their vitality. They lose their righteous morality. They begin to die. They begin to shift to a darkened state. And that darkened state is the ways of this world. It says they prospered because the Most High that hated the iniquity, which is sins upon sins, was with them, right? So in order to prosper in life on this side, you have to be of the elect, right? And you're going to be magnified in that prosperity, right? But if you are an individual that is laden with sins, then your judgment is to receive what you deserve, as it says in the scriptures. You reap what you sow, right? Verse 18, it says, But when they departed from the way which he appointed them, they were destroyed in many battles very sore. And that's what Esau had to have known. They knew who the Israelites were, man. They read our book. They studied us. We were their guinea pigs. We were their skeletons. We were their endocrine system. We were their intestinal display. We were dissected in the curiosity of these damn devils, man, to see basically what makes a god. They said, well, we know that sin is basically their kryptonite, is how they lose their power. And when they lose their power, they could succumb to our will and bend onto us. Then we can kill them, and that's exactly what they did. And they continue to cycle by influence you with things that causes gods to die, you know, things that cause sin, what are some of those things? For one, murder. They promote murder in these rap songs, in the movies, on the television. They spell it out. They, what do they call it? Concatenate. Not concatenate. That's something. Start with a C. Let me concatenate. Let me see. It's join two or more things. No, it's not it. Join two. Well, basically, what I'm trying to they say things over and over and over again till it sticks with you. It's designed to be stuck in your head. You know, and they have certain individuals set up to promote it as something that's good, something that's cool, and something that makes you cool. You know, and those are sins that those are really sins that involve, death, sins onto death, like murder, adultery, sleeping with another man's woman, wife, right? Committing abortions, that's a sin on the death, because that goes in line with sacrificing your child onto Moloch. And, many others, man. And then also lesser laws, I would say, which, as the scriptures do say, if you break one law, you're guilty of breaking them all. But there is laws that are sins unto death. And then there's also laws that you can repent from, and those sins unto death laws, you will have to be special in the eyes of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua to be forgiven of those things. Like King David, the sure mercies, right? So our enemies, they know these things because they also consult with, spirits on the left-hand side. It says, but when they departed from the way which he appointed them, and also they read our book, they were destroyed in many battles very sore, and were led captives into a land that was not theirs. And the temple of their power was cast to the ground, and their cities were taken by the enemies. But now are they returned to their power and are coming up from the places where they were scattered, and have possessed Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is. So really, you so-called blacks in America, you don't really have a home, because your your true home is the land of Israel, you know, which is being occupied by bastards. That's why it says in the scriptures, a bastard shall dwell in Ashdod, right? So you're not going to see your home until it comes and returns from the sword, because it's going to be destroyed to be cleansed. So the true rightful owners of that land can inhabit it, which is you so-called blacks, Latinos, and indigenous, right? When you're saved from Yahweh's son, Yahweh Shai, because salvation is coming from Yahweh Shai. It says, in the temple of their power was cast to the ground, and their cities were taken by the enemies. But now they return to their power and are come up from the places where they were scattered. So even today our people are scattered. And I possessed Jerusalem, where the sanctuary is, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate. Now, therefore, my Lord and Governor, if there be any error in this people, and they sin against their power, let us consider that this shall be their ruin, and let us go up, and we shall overcome them. But if there be no iniquity in their nation, let my Lord now pass by, lest their Lord defend them, and their power before them, and we become a reproach or ridicule, shame before all the world. You know, let's see, transgression of law. So going back to Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1, it says, hear ye the word which Yahweh speaketh unto you, O house of Yasharallah. Thus saith Yahweh, learn not the way of the heathen, which are these non-Israelite nations, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. Yeah, and they're real terrified at the signs of heaven, man. You know, it says, for the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain, which is going into their so-called holidays. This is actually talking about Christmas, which really has, it's like it really goes back to the Sumerian, I believe, um, Tammuz, Nimrod. Hold on, just so I won't butcher it, because I forget the name. I forget the bitch's name. Uh, Semiramis. Mother Tammuz. Yeah, Semiramis. Going back to that story. Verse 3, it says, for the customs of the people are vain, for one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They this is big business for Esau too, selling Christmas trees. You notice, they only do it once a year. So it has to be something that's profitable else you wouldn't see Christmas tree lots, you know, every 1 or 2 miles from each other during the holidays. If you live in those certain areas, it says they deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be borne, meaning to be carried, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good. And these are certain customs that keep us from Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, that we have to repent, we have to turn away from, and proceed toward, what Yahweh Bashim Yahushua desires us to do, which, quite frankly, is way more cooler. Going back to, the turning of things upside down now, being wicked is the cool thing to do. But going back to co-pilot breakdown for the word learn in the Hebrew lamad, it's like to train yourself, practice, adopt customs, and we didn't perform the Passover perfectly the first time, but over the years, as we maintained the faith, we became more and more, it sharpened us. Same thing with these people in the world when they practice these certain holidays. You know, it's like they train themselves. It becomes natural. And then with that, naturalization, they therefore push it onto their children, onto their children, and onto their children. You know, and Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua, as you read in the scriptures, he nips that in the bud, man. That's part of the reason why he didn't want us to marry any of these women from these heathen nations. The next word, way, Hebrew, darak, path, lifestyle, culture, religious practice. And, that's what Esau's trying to push onto the world, man. That decadent, deviant, tired, worn out white supremacy, man. He wants you to live according to his lifestyle. He wants to make a fusion of cultures, into his own modified version, and he wants you to follow it. He wants you to believe in his God, which is the spiritual demon Satan guised in all these different lies and, identifiers, like so-called Jesus. The word heathen, goyim or goyim. It says the nations outside the covenant, because they were never given the law. Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua, he was only dealing with the nation of Israel. It says GMS style point, it says being worldly equals adopting their ways, their customs, their holidays, their philosophies, their moral code. This is the root definition of worldliness in scripture. And that's 2/3 of, you so-called blacks, Latinos, and indigenous. You're trained to go in wickedness. Worldliness equals breaking the law to fit in with the nations. And that's all, especially the women, man. People always talk about how much you don't give a fuck, but your actions show that you do, because in your actions, you do things to fit in. This is Leviticus chapter 18, verse 3. After the doings of the land of Mardazarium, wherein ye dwelt, shall ye not do. So wherever we are sent to be under subjection as punishment, we're not to do the things that the nations that we're underneath do. No, we are to be separate. That's why we are a holy people. It says, and after the doings of the land of Canaan, whether I bring you, shall you not do. You know, modern day Canaan now is America. You know, it says, neither shall ye walk in their ordinances. Ye shall do my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk therein. I am Yahweh your power. Right. We keep the things that we can keep to the best of our ability. Right. But certain things we can obey, since a lot of you like to wear that brand, you know, is not committing murder, you know, committing adultery, you know, committing sins on the death, being a mo, that's a sin on the death. You know, I believe, well, I think that's only dealing with the priest's daughter. If she's a prostitute, you're supposed to burn her or stone her. You know, but it also says that shouldn't be a prostitute among the daughters of Israel, man. But continuing, it says, ye shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man do, he shall live in them. I am Yahweh. Right. So if you're living in something, you're trained in it. You've been conditioned in it. You know, you have a pattern of it. You have some consistency. Going back to co-pilot, Egypt plus Canaan, which Egypt is a Greek word. The original name of that land was Mardazarium in the Hebrew. All right. It says Egypt plus Canaan equals symbolic of all heathen nations. Israel was surrounded by nations with sexual immorality, and we're starting to see the sexual immorality among these Edomites, man. You know, with the whole Epstein case. You know, I'm in the middle of watching Trap Lore. I just came from the gym, you know, not too long ago. But, you know, there's sexual immoralities all over the place right now. You know, idolatry, you know, worshiping these demons, these devils, these idols, these false gods, and having you believe that they actually exist. You know, child sacrifice. I'm starting to see that, man. Nobody's talking about the Brooklyn tunnels, though. You know, which, you know, starting with the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, we've been breaking down these things. You know, this is what, you know, those conspiracy theorists were talking about. Those truthers. It says witchcraft, which Esau, he's heavily into witchcraft. You know, and in return, he passes all these things on to you, Jakes, on you 2/3. And you're heavily into witchcraft. How many videos did you see so-called black women talking about putting spells on people? Or videos of individuals warning against that practice. Lawlessness. That's the thing now. You have to always introduce yourself when you tell somebody where you're from, and then they expect you to give your paperwork. All the wickedness that you done or are capable, are capable of or will do, man. Which is stupid. That's why I pray that every time that I go out, that I don't have to interact with too many people, man. It's vanity and pride, and these people are full of pride, man. You know, point. It says worldliness equals copying the nation's lawless behavior instead of keeping Yahweh's laws. It says worldliness equals forsaking the covenant to imitate the nations. And this is what Esau made a grand effort to do, to make sure that you know we weren't going to keep our customs. We were going to be in full subjection underneath him, man. Fucking. This is Psalms chapter 106, verse 35. But were mingled among the heathen and learned their works. Let's see if I can start up. Don't want to make that same mistake again. Okay. Talking about provoking. It says Israel's rebelliousness and Yahweh's deliverances. So I'm gonna start a little bit up. I'm gonna start at let me see, what is it quote? 35. I'm gonna start at 34. This is Psalms chapter 106, verse 34. It says, they did not destroy the nations concerning whom Yahweh commanded them. Which that was dealing with Amalek, man. And you see what happens when you don't follow orders, man, when you don't listen. It says, but were mingled among the heathen, which we are to this day, and learned their works, which our people have done. And they served their idols, so-called Jesus, so-called Virgin Mary, so-called Allah, so-called Prophet Muhammad, all those false deities, man. It says, which were a snare or a trap onto them, because it's going to cause you to be disqualified from being adopted back to that godship, that that God power. You'll have to come back through the ones that make it out of here. So breakdown: mingled equals blended, assimilated. And our people have blended themselves and assimilated themselves amongst these heathens, man. And these heathens hate your fucking guts, man. Despite them smiling in your face. Oh, well, they're trying to take your place. Them backstabbers. You know, that's all these heathens, starting with Esau. They're not your friend, man. And, 2/3 of these niggas ain't your friend either, man. Don't get it fucked up. It says, learn their works, adopted their culture and sins. You know, it says, serve their idols, equals spiritual adultery, which is, you serve, a lot of you serve Cesare Borgia, thinking that you doing something with a Tammuz cross medallion and shit, tattooed crosses on your body and shit, man. It says, point. It says Israel becomes worldly when they blend in with the nations and break the commandments to fit their lifestyle. For worldliness equals rebellion against Yahweh's holiness. So let's go to Leviticus chapter 20, verse 26. It says, "And ye shall be holy unto me." So separated or separate. For I, Yahweh, am holy, and have served you, Slakia, and have severed you from other people, that ye should be mine. Right? So we're above these people, man. So we shouldn't be going to them. They should be coming to us. Right? So going back to co-pilot, break down the word severed in the Hebrew, badal, to divide, separate, distinguish. Point: worldliness equals undoing the separation Yahweh created. St. James 4, St. James chapter 4, verse, keep it in the spirit of what I'm talking about. But this is St. James chapter 4, verse 4. It says, "Ye adulterers and adulteresses," which this is going into spiritual adultery. It says, "Know ye not the friendship of the world," which is proven through the words friendship of the world. Right? So if you're a worldly MFer, which doesn't necessarily have to start with mother, it could start with maggot and end with the other word that rhymes with maggot that starts with F. If you're a worldly person, individual, then you are considered a adulterer or adulteress. And it says, "Suffer them both not to live." So the blood of Yahweh Shai is not covering you for the judgment to pass over your head. It says, "Is enmity with the Most High." Let's look up the word enmity. Hold on, let's make sure it is here. No, he didn't even say it, little jerk. Enmity. Going to Emma online. That's all dope. They got more shit on there. More others. Anyway, this is the word enmity, late 14th century, hostile feeling, rivalry, malice, internal conflict. An enemy. So enmity means you're an enemy with the Most High, right? When you are a worldly motherfucker. And I really meant to say that the maggot eye, the maggot eye, but it start with an F. Because that's pretty much what these people are. They're a bunch of maggots and they're a bunch of, that word you can't say nowadays. It says, "Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah." So if you're a friend of the world, you're an enemy. And that's the reason why Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah is about to mop you niggas up. And if I'm part of that number, then so be it, man. I'm at peace with that. As long as Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah Ba'ashem Harachakodas will is done, whether it be good or evil. As long as he gives me the spirit, well, I'm not making a demand, but I pray that he gives me the spirit to at the least, glorify his name and praise his name, and take accountability for my own actions. If I indeed have any actions that I'm not going to be forgiven for. But, breakdown, adulterers equals covenant language, which, adulterers is you basically cheating on, well, I don't want to use that word cheating. I'll use trespassing against Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, and, disrespecting him, saying that he's not a good enough God. So you got to follow after the gods of these heathen nations that don't have no gods. Because these heathen nations were created to be your servants. You are supposed to be their gods. That's why there's a term called reprobate. It says only Israel can commit spiritual adultery because only Israel is married to Yahweh. Let's get that in Jeremiah. This is Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 14. It says, "Turn, O backsliding children," which, in the Hebrew, it translates to bunyam, which means sons. Saith Yahweh, for I am married unto you. So essentially, we're his husband. That was Satan right there. Salakia. Let me correct that. Correction in progress. So realistically, he is our husband and we are his wife, which is symbolic. The wife represents the church and the husband represents Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. So we are to be joined onto him in marriage, right? So, really what Yahweh Bashim Yahushua is about to commit is a heat of passion crime. Seeing his wife, imprisoned and beaten severely, by another man. Heat of passion, heat of passion. And that's why, when you go into the judgments of what's going to happen to America and what's going to happen to these so-called white people whose line goes back to Esau, you see why the judgment is overkill. Heat of passion crimes refer to violent acts committed in a state of emotional disturbance, often provoked by a significant event, which can lead to reduced culpability in legal context. Uh, Definition in legal context: heat of passion. This term describes a state of intense emotional disturbance, such as rage or terror, that can lead an individual to commit a violent act without premeditation. It is often used as a defense in criminal cases to argue that the defendant acted impulsively due to provocation rather than with malice forethought. You know, so it's going to be as if Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua had the spirit of someone who killed someone in a heat of passion. And that includes 2/3 of his own people that are worldly, that want to follow after this world, man. me see. I don't think it's right there. Hold on. Maybe it's in the Apocrypha. Let me see. I'm trying to look for this scripture where it talks about how Yahweh Shah is going to return and, scream, shout like a travailing woman. But pretty sure somebody that's watching the video is probably screaming the correct precept. If I can't find it, then, I forget exactly how it goes. Okay, maybe we cooking with grease. Yeah, this is Isaiah chapter 42, verse 13. It says, Yahweh shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. Exodus 15:3. It says, he shall cry, yeah, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. I have long time holding my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. Because a lot of you don't think God exists because he ain't been doing nothing, man. you know. But all of it was because prophecy has to be fulfilled. But now that prophecy is at that stage where he can intervene, oh boy, it's about to get on and cracking. It says, now will I cry like a travailing woman I will destroy and devour at once. And that includes you that want to be worldly, which is enmity. It makes you an enemy of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, the Heavenly Father, and who the world early calls Jesus Christ. Going back to co-pilot, the word friendship in the Greek, philia, where you get a philos, I believe, or philos, where you get Philadelphia. Deep alignment, loyalty, shared values. Right, man. Um, I gotta think of that on camera. Not verse, but next word in the Greek cosmos, the heathen order, their customs, their rebellion, right? Because cosmos, I believe he gave another definition, right? Which is order, arrangement, system, often the present order of men, especially in rebellion against the Most High. So John 3:16, it don't got nothing to do with the whole world. It only is talking about the world of Israel, not the world which is makes you an enemy of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua if you are of the world. It says not just planet, but the structured society, customs, and values. Right. Going to the point, it says worldliness equals Israel cheating on Yahweh by aligning with heathen culture and breaking his laws. I didn't want to use the worldly term of cheating, but transgressing, not doing right by, because isn't that what we all desire for, people to do right by us? So going to Romans chapter 12 at the top. Romans chapter 12, verse 1, it says, I beseech, which to beseech means to beg. It says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, or brothers, plural, by the mercies of the Most High, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, which that's dedicating your life to this truth. And that means going out on the highways and hedges, putting up videos, obeying the laws to the best of your ability, being a brother, and thinking about Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua and how to please him all the time, man. It says holy, being separate, you know, shouldn't be nobody in these protests or these riots, or thinking about going out there and thinking you're going to do something in these wars. Nah, well, the scriptures say to wait upon him. And, as the scriptures do say, you don't want your hands to be too bloody to be able to be worthy. You don't want your hands too bloody to be worthy to not. You don't want your hands too bloody not to be worthy. It says acceptable unto the Most High, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world. So don't be conformed to this world. Let's look that word up in the etymology. which is mid 14th century. Be obedient, be agreeable to fashion, to form, to shape, educate, modify, you know, to make of the same form or character, bring into harmony, make agreeable. So you don't want to be in the character or the characteristics of this world because it's not cool. It says, but be ye transformed by the renewing. So you have to pretty much re-educate, or not re-educate. You have to relearn, be re-taught of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua. And you'll have that understanding through experience as you become more seasoned, and the Holy Spirit has supped with you. So going back to AI, breakdown conformed in the Greek, schematizo, sounds like synchronize or something, right? To shape yourself after another pattern, right? The word world, Greek eon, the mindset, spirit, and moral code of the present age, which a lot of you have, you done drunk that Jim Jones. You done drunk his Kool-Aid, man. Worldliness equals shaping your life after the nations instead of after the commandments, right? Worldliness equals lust, pride, and vanity learned from the nations, right? Because you see, even in hip hop, I remember Kanye West, and it just crossed my mind how, he didn't expect. So he said, for songs like Jesus Walks and so on and so forth to become hits because it wasn't going to get the monetary backing, to push it forward as far as marketing, to make it a hit, and that's Esau, because he doesn't want Jake to do right. He wants to pump your head up with things that are contrary to what Yahweh Bashem Yahushua desires, how he wants you to move. Right. So worldliness equals lust, pride, and vanity learned from the nations. 1 John chapter 2. This is 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. That just says, do not love the world. It says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And a lot of you love the things of this world, man. That's why you sell out and try to, get, I'll say, a temporary bag, because you're only going to have a temporary amount of time to, to spin it and to enjoy it. It says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If a man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Right? So if you love the world, the love of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua is not in you. And that means that, you're a malicious soul. And wisdom doesn't dwell, in a malicious soul. It says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world." So Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shai didn't teach us to be that, to live as such. It says, "In the world passeth away," and this world is about to be destroyed, man. It's going to be a new ownership. It's going to be under new ownership. That's going to get your mind right. Brock Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shai, or I should say Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shai Barak, to that brother. I know he's in the spirit world waiting with, the armies, but, he had that channel that was very edifying. GMS, get your mind right, you know. But continuing, it says, "In the lust thereof," all the desires, that you people are growing accustomed to in this world. It's all gonna pass away, man. It says, in case in point, we don't remember how the world was prior to the flood, man. We only know that it was, immensely wicked. It says, "But he that doeth the will of the Most High abideth forever." So your desire should be to do the will of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. And, going back to breakdown, it says, "These lusts are not of the Father," meaning they come from the heathen. Israel becomes worldly when they chase heathen fashion. Oh shit! Hold on, it was getting good. When they chase heathen fashion, heathen entertainment, heathen sexual culture, heathen pride and status, heathen greed and materialism. Yeah, they talk about brokies and you gotta be rich and you ain't nothing if you ain't a high value man. Well, this economy's crashing, man. I checked out Bitcoin yesterday and it lost what, 30 something, 35, 40% for the year. When this dollar, they already, I think, passed something where they're about to phase out the dollar, man. It's going to be all digital. So what's the point of chasing riches? The true riches is this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, man. And, that's how you know that it's a heathen, pushing these things, or a 2/3 nigga that is pushing those things, because they're worldly. They're enemies of the Most High, right? So what is an enemy going to do? He's going to try to, um, I don't want to say compromise. I'll say compromise the mission, right? Point: worldliness equals adopting the heathen's lust-driven lifestyle. And that's all it is about in this society, is your lust, that burning desire to please your flesh. These people want to eat, drink, have sex, do drugs, and be entertained. Which is whack shit. It's the same shit over and over and over and over. It becomes irritating due to redundancy. 8. It says worldliness equals rejecting the commandments. So let's go to Deuteronomy 12, verse 30. It says, "Take heed to thyself that thou be not snared by following them," which is who? These heathen nations. right? It says, after that they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods. And these are talking about the heathen nations, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. So you're not supposed to be serving these heathen nations' gods because their gods don't exist. You're just pretty much slapping your own self in the face, trying to slap the Heavenly Father. It says, thou shalt not do so unto Yahweh thy power, for every abomination to Yahweh which he hated have they done unto their gods. For even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. And these heathen nations have always been about that weird shit. Child sacrifice, murdering children, eating children, having sex with children. And now you're seeing it in real time, man. And these people are trying to defend Trump. How soon did they forget that prior to winning the election, he was about to go to court for 34 felonies, man. So he's a bad hombre, as he labels everyone else, man. It says, verse 32, it says, what thing soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto nor diminish from it. So we have to strive to observe to do it. The things of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, going back to co-pilot, the word for breakdown, following them equals imitating the nations, leads directly to breaking the commandments, right? So when you imitate these piece of shit people, man, you're breaking the commandments of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua. And that's the reason why, you find yourselves in the predicament that you're in, man, or people in as a whole. Point. Worldliness equals being snared into sin by copying the nations, right? And that's what Esau is trying to do. He's trying to force the world onto his ways, which his ways is of the spiritual demon Satan. He's he's a child. He's the son of Satan, man. These are the children of Satan, the sons of Satan, man. Ha ha, the joke's on you. Didn't they say the greatest trick that Satan ever pulled was to convince the world he didn't exist? He's been right in front of your face the whole time. And he lied and started to call himself white, as Satan would do. Just so you Italians, you Irish that go back to Israel, that are actually Israelites, won't join forces with your fellow brothers that were sold over here from the tribe of Judah. Baruch 4:1. This is Baruch chapter 4, verse 1. It says, this is the book of the commandments of the Most High, and the law that endureth forever. All they that keep it shall come to life, but such as leave it shall die. Right? So if you deviate and go back into following these heathens, you're going to die. Point. Leaving the commandments equals worldliness, equals death. And that's why, it's always said and talked about concerning going back into the world. You're going to be destroyed unless you are a special spirit, and that's just part of the story, because I'm pretty sure, Yahweh Bashem Yahushua is going to have mercy on certain individuals to be an example of his mercy. You know, which is going to be, and those individuals are going to be of the elect. All right. This is Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. It says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." Yeah, because they've been lied to by these heathen nations to keep them in that state of death, man. That decayed state, that zombified state, which is in result of them not following after the ways, the commandments, the statutes of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, but following after the ways of these heathen nations who are really our property. It says, because thou hast rejected knowledge, and by our people rejecting knowledge, that's them not listening to the prophets. Those men that Yahweh Bashem Yahushua chose to be in those streets, teaching his word on those street corners. It says, I will also reject thee. So now Yahweh Bashem Yahushua is going to reject 2/3 of his own people. And that's why he's sending the dogs on him. ICE, soon the military, soon these white nationalists, soon those nuclear missiles. It says that thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy power, I will also forget thy children. Right. And, that blood has covered your children, going back 2,000 years ago when they said, let his blood be upon us and our children. Our children's children, which is heavy, man. What the fuck? With the water Yahweh Bashem Yahushua for having it written in my law to react that way. Going on what? 16, 17 years in the truth? Teaching the word. And I'm still have the same enthusiasm of dying. And not in the sense of how you view the terminology being in this world. No, that's not the death that I always proclaim to want to seek. I'm talking about the death in righteousness, the death that righteous men are willing to take, in order to, glorify Yahweh Bashem Yahushua. The same thing, the same spirit that you read of considering the 7 sons, man. Let Yahweh Bashem Yahushua get the glory. Right? Breakdown, it says knowledge equals the law. Malachi chapter 2, verse 7, because this is the time in which he's supposed to be getting his glory now. He has to get his glory first. He's the one that died for us. We haven't been privileged with the opportunity to die for him yet, and to die for the belief in him. So he's the one that's gonna, instead of us worshiping him, he's gonna turn and put crowns on our head, man, and king us. Y'all shout out the zombie of that number, man. Which that's gonna be a beautiful day. Those that stood so stiffly for the name of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, continuing, it says, when Israel loses the law, they become indistinguishable from the nations. Let me see, Malachi. Right, this is Malachi chapter 2, verse 7. It says, for the priest's lips should keep knowledge. Are we not all, priests? It says, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he is the messenger of Yahweh of armies. All right, going back to co-pilot point, it says worldliness equals identity loss. Synthesis, worldliness equals learning the ways of the heathen, following their customs, breaking the commandments, blending in with the nations, abandoning holiness, committing spiritual adultery, taking on the heathen mindset, living by lust, pride, and vanity, rejecting the covenant, losing Israelite identity. Worldly does not mean having possessions, living in society, working a job, using technology. It specifically means Israel abandoning Yahweh's laws to imitate the nations. So with that, I hope at least one brother of the elect was edified, did this lesson to the best of my ability. The water Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shabbat Hashem Harakach for rewarding me with that opportunity. So with that, I'm gonna say Shalom.